Stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All
What
right,
do we have, Mike?
just, you have the score sheet, so you can see that the selectmen have voted no action on Article 1, and they have voted to recommend Articles 2, 3, 4, and 5. And if we can just, Article 1 is prior year bills. We have it there as a placeholder, and no one has submitted any prior year bills.
Hold on one sec. If Kaylee's not here, who wants to take minutes?
I did it last time.
That is true.
I think it's Walter's turn, isn't it? Going alphabetically, from the front of the alphabet to the back, and then working your way towards the middle.
Like you're thinking.
All right, I'll get even with them later.
Thank you.
You
Thank
got an easy one.
I know, right?
Okay, so, sorry, Mike. So Article 1, Selectmen, no action. We have to vote on that?
Yes.
Yes.
Why not?
Recommend no action.
Second.
Hearing a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Unanimous?
Okay, Article 2 is submitted by the Treasurer's Office, and Article 2 is an article to rescind authorization to borrow. Right now, I gave you a list of the various projects. So this is a result of projects that we either got grant money for, MSBA reimbursements for, or the projects came in under, and we didn't need to go out and borrow the entire amount of money. So this just gets it off the books when we vote to rescind it.
And I'm taking that, since this goes back to 2011, we don't rescind that often. So we're kind of catching up.
Right. They just went through all the different articles for the past few years to see, and then look to see which projects have been completed. And now it's just to rescind that extra money.
One other question, just so this is money that we allocated, or they could have borrowed, or?
Well, what happens is, say like the high school project, you have to authorize borrowing for the entire cost of the project.
Yep.
And until you finish the project, you do temporary borrowing.
Yep.
And then when the project's finally finished and you know what the dollar amount is, you know what the MSBA reimbursement is, that you go out and do borrowing for the entire amount
Yeah.
instead of just the temporary borrowing. And so whatever we have extra, even we were authorized to borrow, but we didn't borrow that
In the
amount.
temporary part.
Yep.
So we haven't, okay. we got it.
And like the Crane Farm, there was a grant, but we had to authorize the whole purchase price. And then there was a grant, and so we take that off.
Jim,
Yes.
dates here are dates of the town meetings?
Yes. Yeah, the article number and the date that it actually occurred.
Okay.
And can we just vote this as one thing, or do we have to go through each?
I would vote as recommended. You don't have to vote the whole list, just as recommended by the treasurer.
Okay, yep.
I make a motion that we recommend as written in the article. Second.
Having a motion and a second, any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Unanimous?
Article 3, there was an authorization to spend $65,000 on the town common fence. So that included the repair to the fence and the installation, but the highway department's been doing a lot of that work themselves, which has saved a lot of money. And so this would authorize any money that's left over above that 65,000 could go to other improvements on the common. They're looking at lighting right now, so this money would be used for that or anything more they need as far as landscaping. There's been a lot of volunteer work, a lot of effort from the highway department, so it saved a lot of money along the way.
Yep.
The other thing they're looking at is benches. Right now,
Mike-
there's nowhere to sit.
This is to go above the 65,000.
No.
Won't go above. It will
Won't go
just
above.
say if there's anything left over from that 65,
Yep.
they could use that to buy benches or lights.
And what's left over right now?
Right now, there is about 18,000 in the account.
And now, this is what we appropriated, but there was also private money raised.
Right, I'm not sure what the gift account is. There've been small contributions, there haven't been a lot of large ones, but they'll still be using that too.
So now, is the scope of this project expanding? Is that what's happening when I hear lighting and benches?
Yeah. Like, right now, their estimate for lighting is between 10 and 12,000 and benches 6,000, so this would allow them to use some of that money.
Lighting in addition to, aren't there like street lights all around that thing?
Yeah, this would be lighting inside along the walkways, I believe.
Okay, okay.
The gift account, is that just for the fence, or is it for the town common?
Town common improvements.
Okay.
I recommend we approve Article 3.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion on Article 3? Seeing none, all in favor? Opposed? Motion
Article 4 is the next article we're going to talk about, and that Adam will come up to talk, is this would be an energy tax agreement for this project. And based on the size of this facility that they're planning on constructing on the bogs on Bay Road, they've agreed to a tax agreement with the town, the selectmen have already voted on, that would provide the town with $200,000 a year for 20 years. So a substantial amount of money that we certainly can use. And this makes it stable, not if it was taxes sometime, when everything starts devaluing, the taxes would go down. This gives us, we know we're gonna get $200,000 a year for 20 years.
So after 20 years, what would we approximately probably get then?
Say that again?
What would we get after 20 years? What would it be per year? Would it be more than 200,000?
After the 20 years?
Yeah, after 20 years is up, yeah. What would it revert to on
I guess it would depend
the property value?
what the assessors assess it at that time.
Oh, okay.
Or would you, at that point, enter into renegotiations and come up with a similar type plan? Is that a possibility
Right,
as
well, the assessors would see what the assessment would be, and then would sit down with the owner at the time and try and negotiate a new agreement.
So one other question. So what kind of a break are they getting now? Would it be more than 200,000 now? Is that
If they were paying taxes, it would be less than 200,000.
less than 200,000?
And they're not paying taxes because it's a farm?
No, it's a tax agreement to make it steady for us, so we know we're gonna have a steady income, rather than have a regular tax where they could appeal it to the appellate tax board and reduce it each time. I mean, you might remember that The towns were in court with Verizon constantly over their taxation. So this is a way to avoid that and have a steady stream of income.
Yep.
Is there any agreement if there's a early termination or expiration?
Do you have the pilot there? Yeah. Adam, do you want to come up too?
Hi, Adam Schumacher with Nexen Energy.
Hi.
My understanding on that, to
Go ahead.
jump in, is if the project is terminated, we're required to decommission the project, and we'll be posting a surety bond with the town to ensure that there's funds available for that. And if the project is decommissioned, then it will no longer be there, and so there would no longer be any taxes paid on it.
But you have a liability of removing the solar panels
Yes,
and taking them away.
yes,
And that's what the bond is for?
yes.
And how do you figure out the size of that bond to protect the town in case you just walk away?
So that's part of our submittal to the planning board. It's a requirement under the solar bylaw. We have to submit an engineer's estimate for decommissioning the project and then post a bond for, I think, 120% of that amount. And that bond needs to be in place for the duration of the project.
Yep. Aaron?
Mike, you stated that the expected tax revenue was, would be less than the 200,000 that we're going to get, which seems counterintuitive to me. What was, if this were just, if there were no flat $200,000 deal in place, if that hadn't been negotiated, do we have an idea of, and I'm assuming, because wouldn't have been able to have a basis of negotiation, what would the taxes have been?
It's less than the 200,000. I know that. I don't have that with me, but it was down.
Now, and then anticipated to go up in the future, so you probably found some middle ground over the
Right.
20, okay.
On average, I think it was maybe 163,000 or something of that, in that area, averaged out through taxation.
Yep.
Mike, I maybe take things out of order. Is Article 5 to allow building on the bogs of the solar panels?
That's what Article 5 is.
So if we approve this, but don't approve 5, then this doesn't get approved?
Right, exactly.
Okay, maybe we should have addressed.
Well, it's incentive to say, we're going to get 200,000 a year, but you got to approve that next time.
Right, right. Yeah.
Okay.
So along the lines of Aaron's question, what is the benefit to the solar company to enter into the agreement if the taxes would be less? Is it just that it balances out over time and it stays fixed for you, or how does it work?
So, we are very incentivized to have a stable amount as well. And, frankly, part of the reason for making it a higher amount initially is to be attractive to the town and provide benefit to the town. And we're happy to do that as and be a good citizen. And so it's the project, assuming the project can be built at the size that we're contemplating right now, it can afford that amount. And we part of the other background here is that the incentive program that this project is qualifying under, or will hopefully qualify under, is quickly running out of capacity. And so this needs to be done. We need to get through the permitting process very quickly. And so in order to do that, we requested that a special town meeting be held for this amendment and for this pilot. And we're asking a lot of the town to help put this project forward, and so we're also giving back.
Meeting halfway.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
How many kilowatts are you going to generate?
It's contemplated as an 8 megawatt system. Could end up being slightly larger than that. We're kind of working through our final design right now and submitting to the planning board very soon. And it could ultimately, depending on what happens through the process with the planning board and with the Conservation Commission, the project could end up being shrunk somewhat, and that's something that Mr. Units and I are working on now. Is just, if the project does end up being shrunk, we need to adjust that amount downwards kind of proportionally.
For 8 million megawatts, what would that payback be of? And how much per kilowatt hour does that relate to?
So this project has there's the incentive program is called the SMART program. That's the new incentive program. There's a base rate plus an adder for being a dual use agricultural solar project, plus another adder for having a combined battery storage system. So with all three of those combined, it's about 22 or 23 cents a kilowatt hour.
At 8 megawatts,
Yes.
200,000 doesn't seem outrageous then.
Are you managing similar projects right now to this size? And maybe just give us an overview of your company?
Sure. So our company it was founded in Massachusetts in 2008, and we did a lot of projects in Massachusetts and Vermont from 2008 to 2015, and that was right about when the SREC program was starting to kind of dry up. And so at that point, we relocated headquarters to Colorado to take advantage of some of the Western markets. But with the SMART program coming about, we are reinvesting in Massachusetts. We, in Massachusetts and Vermont, we developed and built 40 megawatts of solar projects, and we currently own 20 megawatts of those, so half of that. So we do the largest project that we currently own is a 5 megawatt project, so similar in size to this project, although this is obviously bigger, but nothing. I would say, vastly different than our current business can handle. So we're very confident in our abilities to construct and own and operate the project. We have boots on the ground here in Massachusetts. We have our own operations and maintenance department that takes care of all of our projects here and in Vermont. And actually, we were the exclusive provider of solar services to the town of Middleborough for a few years. So we did most of their solar projects under the SREC program. So we've got a good number of projects fairly close by.
So cranberries can still grow on the panels?
Yes.
That's the question we have.
So great question. So the component of the SMART program, the dual use agricultural solar component of the SMART program, is under that you're required to design the projects differently to allow for the continued agricultural operation of the underlying farm. And so these don't look like the standard solar projects that you're accustomed to seeing. I should have brought it tonight. We have a nice rendering of it that we brought last night, but they're spaced further apart and raised 10 feet off the ground so that you can continue to farm underneath. And the reason for spacing them farther apart is because one of the requirements is that you can't shade more than 50% of the sunlight that would have otherwise reached the ground. And these guidelines come from a pilot project that has been going on at UMass Amherst for several years. And they've found that with that spacing and ensuring that at least 50% of the sunlight makes it through, the crops that they're testing are producing on the low end 50% as much as they would have were they not covered, and in some cases actually producing better than the control crops. Like in 2016, which was a very hot summer, the crops that were covered by solar panels actually produced better than the crops that weren't covered. So yes, there is good data to show that the cranberries will continue to grow. Exactly what the impact will be on yield it's going to take a few years, to get some good data on that. But I think it's in some cases it will be. In some seasons, it may even be better than it would have otherwise, and in some seasons, it will certainly be less. But we don't expect it to be less than 50% of what it would have been otherwise.
Yep.
When you build these projects, do you maintain them or do you sell them?
We do both. So of the 40 megawatts that we've developed and built, we've sold half of them and kept half of them. Our intention for this project is to keep it. That's the goal of our business, is to grow our owned assets. So we would definitely love to continue to own and operate this project for its lifetime. That said, if there's a lot of investors that, especially now, are increasingly interested in buying and owning solar assets. So, we would, if we were made a compelling offer, we would need to evaluate it and potentially sell the project. But the project would still be required to meet all of its obligations under the SMART program, no matter who owns it. So,
And Mike, does this agreement survive a sale, or is it built into the?
We'd have to sit down with whoever buys it, and they would have to sign a new agreement.
So it's renegotiated
Yep.
at that point? Okay. Thank you.
And if that were to happen, the surety bond gets canceled, the new person creates one, or?
right, in order to maintain a valid permit, whoever owns the project would need to post that bond. And because if that bond is not there, then the permit's not valid and the project can be ripped out. Or, forced to, the town can enforce an action against it.
Technically, Next Sun would still be responsible if we didn't agree with somebody else.
So that's, whenever a sale like that happens, in order for the financing to all work, we would have to work with the town to assign everything over to the new entity, and the new owner would be required to have everything in place prior to taking ownership of it.
Mr. Chairman, I recommend we approve Article 4. Is that the one we're talking about?
Yeah.
Yeah, Article 4.
Got a motion and a second.
Second?
Any further discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Unanimous.
Article 5, the planning board voted last night in support of Article 5. And Article 5, we are taking care of two issues. When Adam came to us with his request to amend this to put in the new SMART program that would allow the construction over bogs, we're trying to become a green community, because if we're a green community, there's grant funding out there for different energy savings that we could do. And in order to become a green community, we're missing two things right now. One was solar by right, and two, in May, we're going to have to pass this stretch code, which increases insulation requirements and things like that on construction. it's probably going to be state law anyways pretty soon. So we need those two changes in order to be able to apply for any recognition as a green community. So the solar by right, what all that says is before you needed a special permit in order to develop a solar facility, large-scale solar facility. You still will need a site plan. You still need to meet all the zoning requirements, offsets, square percent of lot coverage, things like that. And you will have to go through the site plan approval process, but it's not a special permit requirement. So the only difference is, instead of a supermajority vote of the planning board, you need a majority vote in order to, but that is a requirement under the stretch code, is to allow solar by right. So this, as you can see, we've added Article 5, 1, 2, 3, the fourth paragraph down, as of right citing, which would be put in place. And then the other aspect of it is what Adam is referring to, the SMART program that would allow development on cranberry bogs. And that, if you go to 175.22.3A, the underlying part there is all the new language. So before that, it says that you cannot build these solar facilities on bordering vegetated wetland, riverfront area, and cranberry bogs would have been considered wetland. So now it says, though, notwithstanding the above or the foregoing, installations will be allowed on cranberry bogs. So Adam or whoever is developing on cranberry bogs will still have to file with the Conservation Commission. They'll still have to get a notice of intent. We'll have to go through all the stormwater management where necessary. But it would be allowed, whereas before it would not be allowed at all. Adam, you?
Sure, I was just going to add that the reason that this is even possible is because in early October, the Department of Environmental Protection, or DEP, that is the state agency that oversees the Wetlands Protection Act, came out with policy guidance saying that they are supportive of these dual-use agricultural solar installations on wetland cranberry bogs. Whereas in the past, there have been solar projects built on cranberry bogs, but they needed to be upland cranberry bogs because wetland cranberry bogs were considered wetlands under the Wetlands Protection Act. And so when the DEP came out with this guidance in early October, it opened up basically all cranberry bogs to specifically just dual-use projects. You can't do a normal solar project on a wetland cranberry bog. It has to be this dual-use agricultural type project. Sorry, you had a question before I jumped in there.
No, I did.
And this is strictly for wetlands that are cranberry bogs,
Correct.
not wetlands.
Correct. So the revision says, so the existing solar bylaw prevents development of solar projects in wetlands, riverfront area, floodplain. And then the revision to it says specifically for, thank you, specifically for installations which qualify as an agricultural solar tariff generation unit under the SMART program located on cranberry bogs that are active at the time of submittal of the application may be allowed within areas subject to the Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act or any other town wetland bylaw. But nothing herein shall supersede or eliminate applicable requirements of the Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act and any other town wetland bylaw with respect to such installations.
Thanks, Adam.
And there's nothing in today's solar panels that would be considered environmentally hazardous?
So there, there's one type of solar panel. It's so the majority of solar panels and basically all of the solar panels that you see in Massachusetts are referred to as a crystalline silicon module. And so silicon solar panels are, silicon is just glass, and they're covered with glass. And so it's basically all glass, and you can take it to a recycling center, and they'll melt it down, and they can fully recycle it pretty easily. But there's one type of solar panel which is referred to as a thin film solar panel, and you see that a lot more in like the desert Southwest. And that has cadmium telluride in it, which is a potentially environmentally damaging chemical if it's not handled properly. There are recycling centers that can handle it, but none of cadmium telluride thin film modules just don't perform as well in these higher latitudes. They perform better in high heat. So we're not going to be using thin film modules, and pretty much nobody in Massachusetts will be. And that's I've seen in some town bylaws that cadmium telluride modules are explicitly
Which,
prohibited.
as you're talking, I'm thinking, do we need to do that in what we're writing?
My understanding is that could be recommended as part of the language, and that, from our perspective, that's fine with us because we don't use those modules anyways. So, and I don't really think it would. I don't think it would be damaging to the pursuit of being a green community at all, just because it's, thin film is a minority of the solar panels that are deployed in the country, and it's mainly in the southern latitudes. So I don't think that would be, a drawback to any of the goals we're trying to accomplish here.
Aaron?
Mike, do you see any reason why it would be difficult or objectionable to quickly add some language like that?
Actually, I do, because we don't have any expertise that justifies us stating that. And I'm
Okay.
assuming that the state is who approved this program over Boggs, is gonna regulate what can go there.
Steve?
Kind of in line with that, Mike, so who in the town has reviewed this to give the okay? I know the Board of Selectmen and Planning Board. Conservation,
Conservation,
they're okay with it as
building
written?
inspector,
All approved
health
it?
agent, and town council.
And they had no objections, no questions, everyone
But if
was fine with this?
if you don't ask the question
Mhm.
and you get the answer, then, I don't know. I'm gonna say I'm perhaps talking to an expert in the field who's saying, well, you don't want to use these, so why would we leave it open-ended for someone to come in and say, well, we're gonna use them anyways? That would be my concern, because it is still wetlands.
Because it's more expensive. I would have to say that the photoelectric is more expensive than the silicon.
True. Thin film panels are more expensive, and they're used in the Southwest because they perform better in high heat than crystalline silicon does.
Exactly.
So in those cases, the additional cost makes sense because they perform better, but that's why they're not used here, is because they are more expensive and they actually perform worse in colder climates than silicon panels do.
So they're not gonna use them anyways.
No, and that's why they're not. I'm not aware of a single installation in Massachusetts that uses them currently, and there would be no reason to use them going forward either.
And that's also something that could be addressed in the site plan review process.
That's true. So this is something, regarding like the decommissioning plan that I was talking about earlier. The planning board, I think, could find that if you wanted to use these cadmium telluride modules, you would have to provide a thorough analysis of the operations and maintenance plan and how you're going to protect against the possibility of that chemical leaking, and also a proper recycling plan during the decommissioning process. And if the planning board wasn't satisfied with that, then they could say, well, we don't want you to, you can't use these cadmium telluride panels because you haven't proved to us that it would be safe, and force the developer to use silicon modules.
So I guess my concern is, unless you know that, then you don't know to say, hey, this is gonna cost more to decommission, this is gonna cost more if something happens, the surety bonds should be larger in all, in those cases, so why we don't reference something that gives someone down the line the ability to say, oh yeah, we need to ask X, instead of just leaving it that someone will catch it, because now you're,
Well, I don't suspect this would happen, but as I said, I'm not an expert, so how do I know? Adam could be giving us a line here and telling us that, because he doesn't want competitors who use those to be able to develop anything. I don't know. So, but without an expert being able to say what is reasonable and what isn't, I would defer to the state, the DEP, who regulates these and is monitoring the bogs. And
but that, you're assuming that you're leaving it so open-ended and whatnot, and you're just saying, well, I don't have the expertise, I'm hoping you do, and I hope you're gonna catch it.
well,
I'm uncomfortable with it.
yeah, well, I would just think that this has gone through studies and studies and studies in order for the state to allow it. So they obviously, they understand a lot more than we do, and if that was a concern, I would think they would have said when they allowed this program in their guidance, but these kind of panels cannot be used. If that was a concern
Well,
that was legit, why wouldn't the experts have said these panels cannot be used in Massachusetts?
Well, I'm not saying not to use them, but I'm saying, based on this information, that the use of them has additional costs that you need to account for.
I think he just said that. If in
Right.
fact they decide to use them, then they have to go back and increase the surety bond, because now you're going
But-
to have a hazardous material, quote, that has to be disposed of.
But I didn't hear that.
I did.
I
You just said
I
it.
just heard,
That's what Adam,
So what I was talking about was as part of the special permit or the site plan review, you need to submit a third-party engineer's estimate of the decommissioning bonds, as well as an operations and maintenance plan. And so if you're using the cadmium telluride panels, your O&M and decommissioning plan would need to be different than if you were using a crystalline silicon panel. And so it's part of that, the engineer's cost estimate for decommissioning the project would presumably be higher and take into account the added complexity and of dealing with the cadmium telluride modules. And so that's something that needs to go to the planning board prior to getting a permit issued.
I mean, I don't see it as a problem, to be honest with you. I mean, it's being built the way they're saying it's going to be built, and, so the alternative doesn't present itself. So, the other the other construction method. So, and given all the checks and balances that are in place, I personally, I'm pretty confident that this is something we should go forward with as is.
Yeah, I think that the issue they were raising was maybe not this particular one, but the next one. That might be
Well-
the issue, but it does sound like we're also protected under some state guidelines that hang over all of this. So, if the state of Massachusetts has said, not bothered to, make any distinction in
The
this.
biggest protection to the people doing it is price. It's gonna be cost-effective to do. Why would you spend more money to do something that does the same job in New England than you would?
But it's
It's not
cost,
cost-effective. and
it's not cost-effective today.
Yeah.
But if you're just basing it on
I will
cost,
bet you by tomorrow or next year, there'll be a different product that will replace silicon. That'll probably be perfect, and it won't be a hazard. And we've come a long way with solar panels.
I mean,
Oh,
that's,
I
We
don't-
use them on the mercury capsule.
Or it could be
Believe
highly,
me,
That's-
yeah.
it could be highly effective and a hazard, and would,
Absolutely.
right?
Right.
And then
Absolutely.
But if that's the case, if it's now a hazard and there's a new product on the market, do we want to have some language in our thing that
Well,
protects us about
would-
what? Or do we just rely on the state to make those guidelines for us?
We rely on a site plan
Right.
that they have to
I-
go through. We rely on it.
I was just gonna say, probably, what I think Bill, you're asking for is a product spec and bill of material, where I think it is covered, what I'm reading here, under 175-22.5, paragraph B, it says, a clearing of natural vegetation shall be limited to what is necessary for the construction, operation, maintenance of a large-scale ground-mounted solar photovoltaic installation, otherwise prescribed by applicable laws, regulations, bylaws. So it is kind of covering that material. In other words, there's an authority that will review the product that is going to be used.
And if you look at section 175-22.2H,
I wish we had page numbers and all these things.
H5, there it requires documentation of the type of panels, basically all of the equipment that's going to be used. And then the, looking for the decommissioning. So if you look at 175-22.6 C2, that, so it's the monitoring and maintenance, 175-22.6 C2. So this is where it requires, under the decommissioning of the project, to dispose of all solid and hazardous waste in accordance with local, state, and federal waste disposal regulations. And so, and then the financial surety further down the page states that the surety bond must be determined to be reasonable for the estimated cost of removal and compliance. So that's where it's kind of covered there. And I didn't mean, so it's, I didn't mean to make a mountain out of a molehill, because there are huge installations of those types of panels in the Southwest, and just because they contain hazardous material hasn't prevented that from those projects from being built because of these similar types of requirements that there needs to be a sufficient surety bond in place and a proper decommissioning plan. And so there's, not a real reason to, as long as it's done responsibly, there's not a reason to really be concerned about those types of projects either. But it's just,
Yep.
I have just one last question. The SMART program, is that independent of the Mass Clean Energy Center?
it's, the SMART programs run through the Department of Energy Research, or Department of Energy Resources, the DOER, and the Clean Energy Center, I'm not sure if the Clean Energy Center is under the DOER or not. It's, so I don't know. I just,
I don't believe it is.
okay, so I think it's independent of the Clean Energy Center then.
Great.
Mr. Chairman, I recommend we approve Article 5.
Have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Thanks for answering
Appreciate
all
your
our
time.
questions.
Mr. Chairman, just one other thing. I thought we addressed this in the summer, but it came up again at a selectmen's meeting last Thursday night. One of the selectmen mentioned that one of the members of this committee was posting on social media, more or less discouraging people from cooperating with the Board of Assessors. And I'm just relaying what I heard at the meeting and just saying I hope it's not true. And if there is a member doing that, they really should resign right now. This committee is the Financial Oversight Committee of the town. And for someone from this committee, if they are doing that, to be working against our Board of Assessors who are going out to properly assess properties so that we have the financial resources to appropriate to budgets, and people see that someone from the Finance Committee is saying they're never going to let the assessors into their house, no way, no how, that just doesn't look good. And so I just want to let you know that came up, and I hope it's not true. But if it is, I think that member should resign immediately.
Is this an old?
I don't know whether it was old or not, but
Because I heard that way back in the summer.
right, that's what I
So
thought.
I'm curious if it's a
Yeah.
new
I don't know, it came up the other night. I just hope.
post?
And
or-
just in relation to that, our Board of Assessors, when they go out, they're in a marked car, they wear badges. The companies that they hire to work with them wear badges. So if you don't allow them into your house, it could work against you too, because they're not gonna be able to, they're just gonna, if your neighbor's houses are valued at a certain amount, your house may not be
Right.
as up to speed as your neighbors, they're just gonna classify you the same as your neighbors, so you're better off letting them in, unless you have something to hide, but I would hope people would let them in, they work hard, and it's just tough when that stuff's out there, that now they're feeling, when they go to someone's door, oh no, is this gonna be one of those people that
Yeah, I
been-
hear you.
has been battling? So I hope it was old, but it came up again, so,
I'm hoping it's old.
all right, thanks.
Thank you, Mike. Have a good holiday.
Holiday, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
We're allowed to say that, right?
I don't know, but
I said it.
there you go.
Right, yeah.
Exactly.
We have one thing of minutes, if you want to read them quick.
Yeah, right off the top, I can tell you that where was it? In section 3, departmental liaisons, the Amy in Miss Amy Sawyer is spelled correctly. Unfortunately, our Amy spells it incorrectly. So I will need to change that to AIMEE. And when we approve, hopefully we can just approve as amended, and I'll send out a corrected version.
Aaron, I'm gonna approve this based on the paper. My
I know, it's
I know, it's
very-
thick.
very good paper, high-quality paper.
I believe in a quality tool.
It's a quality tool.
I don't
very
buy my
different from
bandsaw at Home
previous
Depot,
ones.
and
This is what you're gonna be measured by, Walter. I hope you know that.
He even put the logo on it.
Yeah.
I know.
Really, a town
It's
logo.
legit,
I know, that took a long time to
cut and paste.
etch it.
To write it in by hand. Freehand.
Mr. Chairman, I recommend we approve the minutes as amended.
Second.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor? Opposed,
I'm just gonna abstain,
abstain,
because I missed a lot of the meeting, so.
that's all I have for this evening. Anybody else has anything they want to bring up?
Motion to adjourn? Second.
Dean to grace us with her presence.
Have a Merry
at
Christmas.
All those in favor?
Fashionably.
You as well.